Now, welcome to today's lesson. In today's lesson, we are going to continue from where we left off last week. We spoke about repetition and selection structures. We had an introduction to these topics under the general topic of control structures. Now, this week, we are going to continue with that, but specifically, we are going to discuss the repetition structures in VB. Now, for last week, we spoke about the sequential structure. We spoke about the selection structures, which included the if-else structure as well as the select case structure. And under that, we discussed radio buttons, we discussed message boxes, and then we touched on list boxes and combo boxes as well, and also talked about the numeric down-up control as well. Now, this week, we are going to concentrate on the repetition structures, under which we will have a look at the for loop. We'll talk about the do until or do while loops as well. Then we'll talk about certain controls, such as a continuation of discussions on list boxes. Then we'll talk about the input box function. And we also talk about the combo box and the image list at the tail end of the lesson. We will also talk about the menu strip that we will use to add items to our form, that we can program these various menu items and use them for whatever we want to use them for. Now, let's look at the two types of repetition structures. When we're doing our C++, we came across this, and we most likely classify them as pre-test and post-test structures. Now, the pre-test are those structures that actually check the condition before they enter the body of the loop, and the post-test are those that enter the body of the loop before they check the condition. Now, in C++, we had the for loop and the while loop being the pre-test loops, and then we had the do while loop being the post-test loop. Now, here we have things organized a bit differently, so we will have the specifics very soon. So these are the type of repetition structures we have in VB. We have the do loop, and then we have for next loop. Now, the do loop, of course, is a generic loop form for the while loop and then the until loop. Now, when we talk about while loop, in C++, we would say that that is a pretest. In VB, a while loop could be a pretest or a posttest, depending on where the condition is placed. So we'll see some specifics very soon. The for loop is basically the same. It works the same way. We would have a counter variable that we would use to state the initialization, we state the increment, and then we state the condition, all within the same line of code. The do while and then the do until would have all these components, except that they are not placed in one line. They are not placed in the declaration of the structure. They are placed either within or outside the structure, however way you want to do. So let's look at the do loop statement or the do loop structure. Now, the do loop would come with two keywords. The first is the while, which we are familiar with, and the second is the until that most of us probably haven't actually come across yet. Now, the while loop basically works the same as we know it in C++, but then we can use it as both a pretest and then a posttest. So we would state the do and state the while, and then the condition, then the body of the loop. Now, in this case, whatever we do, wherever we place it, we determine whether it is a pretest or it is a posttest loop. So the body of the loop would continue to execute as long as the stated condition is true. All right, so that's the same as what we've been dealing with from C++ to Java and so on. So your while loop would continue to execute for as long as a particular condition that is stated is true. All right. Now, the until loop is a bit of the opposite. That is, the until loop would continue to execute for as long as a condition is false, only to exit as soon as a condition is true. So we will have continue to execute this set of statement until this condition is true. So as soon as the condition is true, the loop comes to an end, and then it is exited. So let's have a look at some examples. So as we indicated, we will have the do while, then do until, then loop while, and loop until. So this is how the structure actually looks like. So in the do while loop, we would have do, then the keyword. So the do and the while are the keywords, then the condition. Now inside the block, you would have the statement that you would want to continue to execute as long as this condition here is true. So it will start from here, check the condition. If the condition is true, it will execute all these statements that are here, and then get here and go back to check the condition. If it is true, then it will execute, get here, go back. So it will continue to loop until this condition here is false, right? So this is a pretest. Now a post-test of the same structure would bring the condition down here instead of up here. So if it is up here, as it is here, that is a pretest. If it is down here, that is a post-test. So we have do, then the statement, and then we'll come to loop, then while the condition. So the only difference between these two is the fact that this here is pretest, this here is post-test, and that here our statement will execute at least once before the condition is checked. So even if the initial condition is false, we're still guaranteed that these statements between the do and the loop will execute at least once before we check to be sure that the condition is false, then we would exit. Unlike here, where we would continue, if the initial condition is false, the statements here will not even execute at all. All right. So pay attention to the fact that the while condition, the while loop would continue to execute as long as this condition here remains true. The same here, this do while loop would continue to execute, that is the statements here will repeatedly execute as long as this condition here is true. The difference between them is that this is guaranteed to execute at least once, even if the initial condition is false, but this here would not execute at all if the initial condition is false. All right, so we have here two examples solving the same problem. So we want to count and display a series of numbers from 1 to 7, right? And then display these numbers on a message box, one after the other. So we would have, we create a variable here called number, then it is of type integer, and then we would initialize it to 1. Now remember, if we don't initialize this, then it will automatically become, number will be 0 as the initialization. So if we don't want it to be 0, then we'll have to quickly initialize. So here we don't, so we initialize it to 1. So here we would have do while the number less than or equal to 7. So what we are saying is that from 1 to 7, so because we have the initialization as 1, so from the beginning, number will be equal to 1, 1 is less than or equal to 7 through, then we would output 1, and then we increase number by 1, so 1 plus 1 will be 2. So we come here and check the condition, 2 less than or equal to 7 through, then we will come and output 2, then we increase it by 1 to get to 3, so we continue to do that until it is 7. Then we'll go the last time and increase by 1, then it becomes 8, right? Then this condition here becomes false, then we exit. All right. So the same here, we would start with this, but here we have the condition as a post test. So we will first of all output 1 before we come and check, because before we add 1 to it to make it 2, then check if 2 is less than or equal to 7, right? Then we'll continue to do till we get to the end. But remember, if we initialize here to 8, right? So if we say dime number as integer is equal to 8, what it means is that as soon as we come here, we have 8 is less than or equal to 7, which will be false. So this here will never run, all right? But if we come here and we say dime number as integer is equal to 8, what will happen here is that we'll come here and then we'll output 8. We increase 8 by 1 to get us 9. Then we come and check 9 is less than 7, which is false. Then we exit. But by which time we have already outputted one number, which is out of our range, right? So it depends on what you want to do. You choose the required structure. So that is what we can say about the while structure. Now the until structure is also the same structure here. It's just that the keyword here will change from while to until, right? So do until, do while. But of course, here we are looking at different dynamics. Here we say the condition is true, so continue to do. Here the condition is true, continue to execute. When we are talking about while, we are looking at the condition is false, continue to execute, and exit as soon as the condition becomes true. Okay. So let's look at the do until structure. So the same as the do while. So you can have the do while, do until here, and then the do until here, right? The same thing. So we will look at the same example that we looked at the previous time. So remember what we have here. So here we are insisting that the structure should continue to execute as long as a particular condition remains false. And as soon as the condition becomes true, it should exit. So remember that example. We want to output numbers between 1 and 7, or numbers from 1 to 7. So we would use the same analogy. So here we would have number is equal to 1, and the do until will continue to execute as long as this condition here is false. As soon as this condition here becomes true, we would exit this structure. So in order to do the same thing we did with the while structure, we need to change this condition here. So instead of less than or equal to 7, we would have greater than 7. So as soon as number becomes greater than 7, we would exit. But when number is between 1 and 7, we will continue to execute this. So that is the little difference that we need to realize. So here we want a false condition to keep our loop running, and only a true condition will exit this loop. For a while loop, only a false condition will exit the while loop. So they are direct opposites of each other. So do until number greater than 7, so you continue to output the number and increase by 1. So you continue to do same. So first number is 1, is number greater than 7? No, we output number, we increase by 1. All right. So we come here 2 greater than 7, that is false. So we output that and increase by 1. Come back here 3 greater than 7, false, right? So we keep doing that till we get to 7. 7 greater than 7, that becomes what? False. Then we do the same thing. Then we go to 8. 8 greater than 7, true. So as soon as it becomes true, we exit, right? So do until the condition is true, then you exit the structure. So here too is the same thing, right? This here will become a post-conditional loop, meaning that at least it is guaranteed to execute at least once before we exit. Okay, so that is what we can say about the do loop. So the do loop is of 2 different kinds, do while and do until. But each of these loops can be set up as a pre-test or a post-test, right? That is basically what we intend to do. So let's look at the for loop, all right? The for loop is also used for the same purpose, except that the for loop is a bit more structured. That is, you would have the initialization, you would have the increment, and then you have the condition all in the same place. So let's have a look at our examples that we did. So here in the while or until loops, we still have the initialization, we still have the increment and the condition, but they are always in different places, right? So this here is the initialization of the loop variable, right? That is number is equal to 1. We are initializing. Then this here is the condition, number greater than 7. That's the condition. And then the increment is number is equal to number plus 1. So all of them are in there, but in different places, right? But for a for loop, all these must be in the declaration or in the heading of the for loop, all right? And then we also have for loop being a bit more like the English language version of the C++ for loop, right? Here we don't have brackets, we don't have explicitly stated conditions, and we don't have the I plus plus and I minus minus and so on that we have in C++. We would have something that feels more like we are speaking real English, right? So here we would have a counter variable, which is like the number that we have in the other side. We have a start value, we have an end value, and we have a step value. So these are the three values that we need to have. So the counter variable will have a start value, which is the initialization. The counter value would have an end value, which is like the condition, and the counter value would a counter variable would have a step value. So in C++, we have for x is equal to 0, x less than n, x plus plus. So the 0 is the initialization, the n is the end value, and then the x plus plus is the step value, right? So that's what we mean by here. So if we want to go up, that is we increase upwards, then we use positive step values. If we want to reduce, right, or if we want to increase backwards, right, then we use negative step values. Okay, so let's have a look at the structure. So we have for, let's say, initialization to limit step value, then you have statement. So the initialization basically is that the variable being initialized. So we have here for number is equal to 1, that's the initialization. Then to 7, that's the limit. And then step 1, that is the increment, right? So just like the way we wrote it in the while loop, we are still working with the same example where we need to output a list of numbers from 1 to 7. So here we have number is equal to 1, that's the initialization. So we want to move from 1 to 7, right, which is the condition. So once the number is between 1 and 7, the condition will remain true. And then every time we finish executing, we get to the next, it will come and execute this step value, right? That is add 1, keep adding 1 to whatever value n has. So you increase by 1. So if we wanted to use the x minus minus in C++, or we want to reduce from 7 to 1, right, then the initial value will now be 7, then the end value will now be 1, then here we will now have minus 1. So we have step minus 1, then it will reduce from 7 all the way to 1. So that is the for loop. So these are the three loops we have. So we have the while, do until, loop until, and then we have the for loop, right? Okay, so as usual, we are going to have an example that we would work and test all these things that we just spoke about. So let's have a look at our class example, which is tutorial 3. So you would launch your Visual Studio, and then we would analyze the problem, and then we begin to design the user interface. After that, we will code, and then we will test. So today's first example is talking about the Product Finder app. Now, the Product Finder app is basically a simple VB application that allows a user to search for products using the product IDs, right? So when a product is found, the corresponding name and price of that product are displayed. So in doing this, we would use certain controls and functions. So we would use the menu strip, we would use the input box, we would use the list box, and then we will also talk about how to publish an application. Now, we mean publishing means basically packaging the application for installation. That's what we mean by publishing the application. So in this, of course, we know to do this, we need to first of all identify our input. So input would be the product IDs, the product names, and the product prices. Those would be the input. And then the output would be basically the information about the product that we are looking for. Okay, so we first start by creating a Visual Basic Windows application. Then we drop some controls such as one menu strip, 2 list boxes, 3 text boxes, and 3 labels. So it's going to be a very simple user interface where we would have one menu strip, we will have 2 list boxes, we will have 3 text boxes, and then we will have 3 labels. Of course, we will then have to reorganize and rename it the way we want. So this is how the user interface will look like. So here we would have the menu. So this is the menu strip that we'll be creating. So you click on this, you have a drop down, right? And then you click on this to execute any part of the code that you want. So here we have 2 list boxes, 1 list box for the IDs of the products, then the other list box for the names of the products. All right, then we have the product IDs for, that is a label here, text box here, label here, text box here, label here, text box here. Okay, so you can see here we don't have buttons. Now we are using the various menu items here as our buttons. So when the user clicks on this, it will execute whatever code that needs to be executed. So we would quickly design this user interface, and then before we go ahead to program this search application. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So let's get our Visual Studio. Okay, so this is our Visual Studio. We will create a Windows application, right? So we will create a new project. All right. Now, once we create a new project, we quickly design our user interface. And once we design our user interface, then we code. You can see my computer is a bit slow, trying to quickly do that. So here we will name this application Product Finder App. So let's say that is, so Windows Form Application Product Finder App. So it will bring us a Windows Form application. So let's make sure this is VB application and not C# or any of those Microsoft-based applications. So once it comes up, we will quickly drop 2 list boxes. We drop a menu item, and then we drop 3 labels and 3 text boxes. Now, the menu item, when we drop it, it will not come on the form. Usually they come beneath the form. So today we will use 2 controls that do not come on the form. They come right beneath the form. Then we use that to set up certain things on the form. Okay, so the first thing we usually do is to create the form and then change the text properties of it. So my computer is extra slow today because I think I'm doing so many things there. So hopefully it will respond very quickly so that we can get started. So the form here, we will name it, or we will give it the text property of what? Product Finder App. Product finder app. All right, then we drop, we drop a menu strip. So we have a menu strip, which is what we have here. Menu strip, we just drag it on the form, but you see that it will not really come on the form. So this is where the menu strip has come to. So we have menu strip 1. So this is where we have a menu strip. Now, when we have such a menu strip, we could basically just decide to use insert standard items. Now this here would basically insert the usual file, edit, and all those things. But that's not what we need, right? So you can see as soon as you click it, it will bring all these things there. Then we will have all these things there, right? But remember, our application right now does not need all that. So we don't really want to have that, all right? So we could just get rid of it and add a new one where we don't want to add all those things. So we go this way and just add a menu strip. Now, we will configure that later. So let's just add all the rest before we proceed. So we'll add 2 list boxes. So list box. So we have list box 1 and list box 2. Then we also have 3 text boxes. So we have text box 1, text box 2, text box 3. Then we have 3 labels. So label 1, label 2, and label 3. So this is all what we need for our user interface. So let's stretch out our form and then begin to organize it so that we can configure it better. So we have here, let's just put any of these on any of that. Good. And then let's put these guys here. Let's be mindful that we don't cover the menu. So you can see that the menu will create a little panel right on top of your form. So when you're creating that and you're putting your controls, you just make sure you don't put anything right on top of it. Okay, so this is the kind of structure we will have. So let's go and begin to do all the things we want to do. So the menu here, we will first of all configure it. So we'll create the file. And then, so if you want to add an item to the menu, so you can see what we have here. So as soon as you type some text in here, it will create another empty one for you in here, right? So you continue to type, and then, so if I want to add more to a particular menu item, so that will create a drop down. I will just come down and then I'll keep adding. So let's see how it works. So here we want to create the file menu item. So let's say file, right? When you hit enter, you see that we now have a new menu item, a drop down for the file. So we can put in here, let's say exit, right? Then here, we can add another one here, which says action, right? Which is what we have on our user interface. And hit enter. Then here, we'll come here and say add product, right? And here we can say search for products or search. So these are the 3 menu items we want to add, right? So we can keep adding if we want, and we can keep adding to this if we want to. So that is how we basically add menu items, right? Of course, as I indicated to you, we could always go here and just add the standard Windows menu item, but of course, we don't want it. We just want a very simple menu item. So where we can come here and exit our application, or we can come here and add a new product, or basically search for a product. Okay, so that is how we work with menus. They are just that simple. Of course, we have more advanced options, but for now, this is enough. Okay, So the next thing we'll do is to basically name our list boxes. So we just select the list box and then we give it a name. So we have LST, let's name it product ID. So product ID, so this is where the IDs would be. And then this is where the product names would be. LST product name. So of course we would want it in such a way that when the products are more than this particular space, it will just add a scroll bar here that you could scroll through, right? So we have to look for the property here. So we make sure the two of them are selected, and then we have always scroll bar. So we'll have scroll always visible, right? Scroll always visible. Then we'll come to make it what? True. As soon as we click on the true, you would see that there would be some scroll bars right here at each side, right? Of course, even though the bar will not be visible, but you see the space. So once the list box is full, it will begin to show the scroll bar here where you could scroll and then see the rest of the things. So usually you try and make sure you have that on. Other than that, when the scroll bar, when the list box is full, it will just create another, let's say another column and begin to add data, which is usually not too beautiful. So this is how we would configure that. So we would also change the text properties of these labels. So we would have the first label will be the product ID, then we have product name, and then we have product price. So these are the things that we need to have. A very simple user interface that we can use for our exercise. And then what we are saying is that there will be a list of IDs here, a list of products names here. The user searches for a product using the product ID. If the product is found, the product will be highlighted here, and the corresponding name of the product will also be highlighted here, and then the product, the name, and then the price of the product will be brought here. That's basically the kind of exercise we intend to do. Okay. So for us to do this, we would need to basically create, or we would use the indexes of these list boxes. Remember, last week I indicated to you that every list box has what we call items. Those are the list of things inside the list box. And of course, we can insert these items into the list box, and then we can use either the items property or the index property of the list box to try to extract these items. So for instance, the first item in the list box has an index of 0, then the second one index of 1, and so on. And we can use listbox.count to basically, or listbox.items.count to basically count the total number of elements inside the list box. Now, once we are able to count the total number of elements inside the list box, then we can basically find the highest index by subtracting 1 from the total number of elements because we have 0 index. So we can use that. That is always very useful anytime we are dealing with list boxes. In that case, we could insert list box, an item at any position. We could do a lot of stuff with it. Okay, so let's create the name properties for these text boxes. I think just escaped me. So we have txt ID, we have txt let's say p name, and we have txt p price, right? So that is basically what it is. So this time around, we are going to use our this search here to basically conduct the search. Now you can see we didn't add any. All right, let me just change this to read only, just to be sure that nobody can change our results. So we look for read only and change read only to true for all these text boxes. So in that case, we are sure that the user will not be tampering with our results. So read only equals false, equals true. So we have all our text boxes being grayed out. So here we would use this here for our search. So the user clicks on this particular button here, or this particular menu item here, and then it will launch our search. But also we did not put in any text box here for our user to enter the ID he wants to search for. This is because we want to use the input function to try and do that. Okay, so the input function looks something like this. Let me see if I can show that here. The input function looks something like this. So that is particular, it's like a message box, but then it has a text box in it where the user can enter some data. Now, once the user is done entering the data, the user hit on OK, and whatever data is here is submitted back to your application, right? So it is a function that kind of returns a value to your code. So whatever value is here is what the application will, application will return back to the code. Now, if you hit cancel, it means empty text would be returned to the code. So we have three things, 1, 2, 3, that are on the input box. So here we would have, this is the caption, which is a text. This is also a caption, and this is also another text, right? So this here will appear at here, this here will appear at the body, and this here is what the user will enter into the list box. So the list of the input box has 3 parameters. So the first parameter is this text here, the second parameter is this text here, and the third parameter is a default value that will be entered into this text. Okay, so let's get back to our product finder app. Now, once we are done, let's go and now begin to program our application. Now, we want to program this particular button here. So this here will act as our button. So we can just double click on it to take us to our code. All right. So when you double click on it and it takes you there, you can just have a look at what event is trying to be captured. So we have the tool strip menu item, right? And that's what we clicked. Now remember, we can give a name to this, right? We can configure each of these independently. So before we begin, let's try and do some configuration here. So it also has properties just like any other item or any other member of the controls class. So if I go to this one, I just make sure it is selected, and I go to the properties window, and then I go and look for the name property somewhere. So if I find the name property, I would say menu. So let's say menu search. So that's the name that we have now. All right. So this one here will now have a different name. Okay, so now this thing did not pick up, so let's remove it. And then let's go and create another one. So now we have our name reflecting here. So we'll have menu search underscore click, right? So, and the menu search is this one. So you could make any changes that you want. You could add images. You could do whatever you want with this just the same way we do with all the other items, right? It has a text property, which is here. It has a name property. It can be aligned. You can add images and other things to it. So it is also just as flexible as any control that we want. So any menu item we add here, we can use it for anything we want. So let's change this exit here. So we have menu exit. We have menu exit, so just to indicate that it is on the menu. So this is what we have. So we are going to use this here for our work. So we have menu, search, click, right? So just like the same click that we've been dealing with. So we are going to create some global variables, right? And we will have other things that we need to do with it. So we will have private, right? So we'll use index, right, to capture whatever index of the item that we are looking for. And then we also want to handle the number of items that are in the list box, right? Number of items right? So they are all integers. Okay, so we have the index, so where the item is located in the list box, and then how many items are inside the list box. Okay, but of course, remember, for our example, we would want to load some data into this here, just so that we don't have to write it in there every time we run our application, right? So we will just load some data in here to do the trick for us. So here we would have, let's load the data first before we continue. So how do we load data in here? So we use the load event of this form, so that by the time this form comes up, we would have all the data that we need loaded into these things. And remember last week we used the what? The listbox.items.add to basically insert items to the list box. So for instance, we could do, just make sure this is clicked, go here and look for the load event. Where do I get load? Load is here. So we double click here, or alternatively, you can just look for any empty space on the form and double click it. Then you end up in the load event of the form. Now, once we are there, what do we do? So let's add IDs to the ID as a list box ID, or we name the product ID, right? Product ID, right? So how do we do that? So we say, let's see, we have products as list, product ID dot items dot add, right? What do we want to add? So here we add any ID that we want, right? The product IDs I have, let me look somewhere in there to find. So we can even just have X, Y, Y, E, 1, right? So let's say that's the product ID that we have. Of course, we could add more. So listbox ID dot items dot add, right? So we have maybe XXTR1, right? So these are the IDs of the product. Now ID can be anything. Remember that these here are just strings or text. We could use anything that we want as a string. So if it is a shop, the shop will have the rules for their product IDs, maybe to be a 7-letter word or 1-letter word or whatever. So I can just copy and paste any number of them, right? And just change the product maybe to So we could change these to 2, right, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So let's say these are the product IDs we have, right? And what are the product names? So we can add product names to list box. So list product name. Okay. So it's the same thing that we need to do. So we would have list product name dot items dot add. Then what are the names that we will have? So let's say it is a car servicing center, right? So what are the names they are likely to have? So we could have engine oil. So we could have engine oil. All right. The same thing we could have as list box dot not ID. List box product name dot items dot add. Right. So oil filter. Okay. Right. So we could just cut this and paste and basically change all the things that we want to add. So let's have a look here. How many did we add? The IDs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we have 10. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So let's add more 8, 9, 10. All right. So engine oil, oil filter. What else can we add at an auto shop? Or maybe floor mats. All right. Maybe air freshener, right? Then we could have wiper blades. What else can we have at an auto shop? Maybe engine cleaner, right? So now what else can we put? Okay. How many do we still have left? We have about 4. So we would have maybe let's just put in some dummy something here. So we have toner. We have maybe cleaner. All right. Then we have something else. Gas. This here we are just putting anything so that we don't waste our time thinking, because once you are developing an app, you would have ready data that you would use, right? So that is not an issue. So we would have what else do we need? Clips, right? So let's just say clips. So these are the product and their ID. So the assumption here is that this XYYE1 is actually engine oil, and this XXTR1 is actually oil filter, right? In that order. So they are connected using the various items here. So once we enter all this, as soon as we run our application, right, we should have all this listed in here and in here, right? Okay, so the next thing is we now go and program our search. Okay, so how do we program the search? We usually create Boolean variables that we use to check whether we found our item or not. And when we find it, then we basically begin to do certain things after we find it, right? So we'll create this Boolean variable, and then we'll also create another variable to hold whatever value the user has entered to search for, right? So we have time is found, right, as Boolean, right? Then we also have whatever ID the user has entered. So dime ID string. Okay. So this is where we would use our input box. Now we say input box is basically like a message box, but with a user input. That is with a text box where a user can enter some data. And whatever data the user enters is submitted back to the program anytime the user clicks on the OK button, right? And when he clicks cancel, empty text is returned. Now remember that whatever the user enters is returned, but then it is in a certain data type, which is a string. So if you want to use it for any calculations or anything like that, you first of all would have to convert it to the appropriate data type. All right. So once we are done creating our variable, then we'll try to collect the user input. And I said we'll collect the user input using that particular data item, which is the input box. So we will have ID is equal to input box. All right. So input box would have 3 parameters. And what are these parameters? The first is the string, comma. Second is also a string, that is what will come up at the top. And then the third is also a string, which is the default value. All right. So we would have this here. So here we would have, okay, that's fine. So here, let's have, please enter a product ID to search, right? So this is where we communicate to the user. Please enter a product ID to search, right? So once we do that, so here, search product. So this one here will come at the very top of the window, right? So if you don't put this, it will come with the defaults, right? That will be the project name. So it will come as product finder app, right? So, but we usually don't want that. We want it to come to describe what that particular input box is doing. So here we also have the default value. So if we want, we could use this one here as the default value, what will come inside the list, the input box, anytime it comes up. Okay, so we'll have this here is the first parameter, which is the text that we will use to communicate to the user. This here will be the second parameter, which is the text that will appear at the top of the window, which is the like the text property, or the, let's say, the caption, right? And this here is the default value, what will be inside the text box when the input box comes up. All right. So these are the 3 things that we have. But of course, remember that we want these things here are actually uppercase. So we can actually change whatever the user enters into an uppercase before we do the search. So we can say to upper. All right. So this here we change whatever the user enters into this input box into uppercase, right? All right, so we also have to lower, which will bring whatever to. So it helps us to format the user input before we begin to do our search. All right, so this is what we use to capture the user input, that what the user will search for. After that, what do? We need to count the total number of elements inside this particular list box so that we'll know whether we are at the end or we are still searching, right? So number of items is equal to list box product ID dot items dot count, right? So this is basically will return an integer which will represent the total number of elements inside this list box. Now what it means is that in this particular instance, this guy here will return 10, right? So number of items will be 10 anytime we run this. If we add another item, then it becomes 11. But remember that the indexes here will start from 0. So this one will be 0 and this here will be 9. So if we want to find the highest index, we have to subtract 1 from the number of items so that we can get that. Okay. So that is basically all what we need in order to set up what we want to do. So the next thing we now need to do is to try and look through, that is, we move through this data to try and find whatever the user has entered, right? So we look through this, trying to find whatever the user has entered into the list box. Okay, so we can use any of the repetition structures that we learned just a few minutes ago. That is, we use either do while, we use do until, or we use a for loop, right? So I will try and use each of these loops to demonstrate how the adjustments that we need to make in order to get each of these loops to do the same thing that we want to do. Okay, so we would have so if we have a loop here, that will be, which loop should we go first for? All right, so let's use so do loop. So let's use do loop and let's use until, right? So we want to loop until the index is greater than or equal to number of items or else. Okay, so if it is the index is not at the end of it, then whatever the user is looking for should match whatever any of this, right? So we have or is found is true. Okay, so we should continue to search for whatever we are looking for until the index becomes bigger than the number of items, right? So which means we've searched all this and we didn't find, or we have found it in any of these, right? So that's what we mean by is found is equal to true. So we'll get to this condition very quickly. So if whatever the user enters into this text box, right, is the same as any of these items, right, then is found is equal to true, right? All right. If it doesn't match it, then we continue to go. So that is what we basically are trying to do here. So if ID is equal to whatever the user has entered is equal to that is any of the product IDs. So that's list product ID dot items ID index dot to string dot to upper so that is, if this is the case, then is found equals true. No, not false, but true. All right. If it is not the case, then what do we do? Then we have to print out, or we have to increase it by 1. So we have to increase the index by 1. So index is equal to index plus 1. Okay. So this is where we do the search. We said if whatever the user has entered is equal to the first item. So from the beginning, index is equal to 0. Remember, we said anytime we declare any integer and then or any numeric data type, and then we don't initialize it, by default it is initialized to 0, right? So here index will be 0. So we talk about the first item. So when we take the first item, we convert it to string, and then we convert it to capital letters, and then we come and compare it to this whatever the user has entered into this input box. If they match, then we say is found is true, right? If they don't match, then we say increase it by 1 and move to the next item, and then compare it to this guy. If they match, good. If they don't match, so we keep doing that until we either run out of items, that is, we get to this place, then we exit, or we find something. So if we don't find anything, then we'll equally get to the bottom of this. So when we get to the bottom of this condition here becomes true, then we exit, right? So either we find it or we don't find it and get to the end here, we would exit. So if we find it, what should we do, right? So if we find it, what should we do? So if it is found, if it's found is equal to true, right? Why do I keep selecting false? If it found is equal to true, then, right, what should we do? We should select that particular product ID, right? So if it is found is equal to true, we should select that particular product ID. All right, so we'll have list box ID dot selected index the selected index is equal to index. Okay, so if it's found here is equal to true, what it means is that when we get here, this condition here will become true, right? If we get here and this condition becomes true, then we have to exit this loop. By the time we exit this loop, this index here will contain a certain value which represents the index here, or which represents the ID here, right? The index of the ID here. So in that case, when we come down here, we can actually select that particular ID, right? So that is what it means. So when we get here, we look for whatever the user has entered into this box. And then we compare it to the first item, second item, third item as we keep looking. So every time we look the first one, we check if it's found is true or if it is at the end of the thing. So anytime we come, so the first time this thing here, the user input would match any of these items, this condition here will return true. Once it returns true, what will happen? We would make is found to be true. Once it's found is true, then this condition here becomes true. Once this condition here becomes true, then we will exit this loop. So by the time we exit this loop, this index here would have a certain value, right? And that value would be the index of the item ID here. So if it is this one, then we can now select this and highlight it, right? And use it to go to the next ID, to the next item, and also highlight the item name. And then we also use that to highlight the item price and so on and so forth. Okay, so that is basically how we would do it. So if we highlight this, that is, if it is not found, right? If we do it to the end and nothing is found, what should we do? Then we should print out a certain message telling people what should happen, right? And we shouldn't select anything, right? So if we don't want to select anything, we just say the selected index is equal to -1. It means nothing will be selected, right? So we'll have list box product ID dot selected item or dot items dot selected index, okay, equals -1. So that means you shouldn't select anything. Here, selected index is the index of the found data item, right? So also, apart from the fact that you shouldn't select anything, it should print some message to the user, communicating with the user that, look, I've gotten to the end of the search and I haven't found anything, right? So we would have message box dot show, where's message box dot show the item, the product could not be found, right? So we could do, sorry, the product could not be found. We say, please try again, right? Something like this, right? A very polite message to the user. And then we use this guy here and say what product finder app, right? And here, what do we want to get? We say the button, which button? Maybe OK button, right? Message box buttons dot OK, right? And then the icon, message box icon that maybe, let's say, information, right? Good. So we are good to go now. So here, once we remember, let me just comment this and say we are using what? We are using loop until. Right, we're using loop until. So later we'll come back and use do while, right? And then later we'll come back and use a for loop, right? So that we'll see how we can do all this. So this is basically it. When we run it, it will load this and this in there. That is if everything works fine. And then when we search for anything, it should find it and it should highlight it. Okay, so let's go back and run this. Okay. Let's see. Now I'm finding it. Let's see. So this is the user interface here. So we can see the various IDs. We can see the various names, right? And then of course we haven't programmed what will happen if the user should select any of these, right? So let's have a look at it. We are going back to now program this side, right? What should happen if something should change here? So we go and use the index change of this particular, the index change event, listbox.index change, to try and find, to capture the user actions here. So when the user selects something, it should find the item and this. And when the user selects something, you should find the item and that. And then also when the user selects a search, you can see it brings up this item here. So we would have product search or search product. Please enter a product ID to search, then the default value here. So once we click on OK, it should highlight whatever is here. Or if we basically add something like this, so we look for the 7th ID. So once we click on it, it's supposed to come down and highlight that, right? You can see that it has highlighted it, and it has highlighted this item also. So this is the name of the product. This is the item. Okay. So we search for the 9th element, and let's see how it goes. Good. This is the 9th element. So we could always search and find anything that we want. So let's search for the 2nd element or the 3rd element, I mean. Then the product could not be found. What happened? So XXTR4. That is a problem. Okay, so we have, it went out of range, so it got to 10, even though it's supposed to be 9. Okay. Let's go back and let's have a look at what is going on. So we have this guy here. Okay. So here we would have to initialize this index here ourselves so that it will always start from the beginning. Now the issue we have here is that we created this here as let's say a global variable or a module level variable. So it is maintaining its value every time we click on the button. So once we find an element, this here is stored. So if we add one to it, we begin to experience some challenges. All right. So in order for us to always start from 0, then we'll have to initialize it here to make sure that we always force it to return to 0 here before we do. But then when we go to other items, then it will always stay as it is. So this time, if we run it, I don't expect us to have any challenges with this. So let's try and share that screen and see where it goes. So once we are here, and then we type in search. So we search, let's say number 9 or number 10, not 9. We don't have up to 10. So once we get here, so the index is now 10. So if we try to do any other thing here with our first code, it would have gone to 11 and go out of range. But now I'm sure if we should type in 1, it should go back to 1 without any issue, right? If we type in 2 or 3, it should go to 3 without any challenge. All right. So that is the error that we committed, right? The error we committed was that anytime we finished searching, the index was stored in the global variable, and any subsequent search would be using that old value, right? So we forced it back to 0 in our click event to make sure that we are always doing the right thing. All right. So the search is working. So the next thing is to connect it to this one and also to retrieve the price and retrieve all the other items to help us to get a good application. Okay, so let's go back to Visual Studio. So we go back to Visual Studio, and then we go to the index change. Now, index change event here basically does a very simple thing. It is triggered anytime the user actually tries to select an item from the list box. Okay, so when we need the user to select something here, and then we would use that to run a certain portion of the code, and we put that in the index change event. So to do that, let's basically double click. Either we double click on the list box, or we select the list box and go to the properties window, and then we do whatever we want to do. Okay, so let's get back here. So we click on the list box, and then we go to the selected index change, and then we double click, or we just double click somewhere in here. Now, once we double click there, we should see the name of the list box underscore selected index change. So anytime the user selects an item from the list box, or the program selects an item from the list box, the list box selected index change would be triggered. All right, which is exactly what we want in order to find what the user has searched for. And then when it is found, since it is selected, we can now use that to find the price of the item and also to find the name of the product, right? So we would use the select case to basically do this. So let's go ahead and then we define some variables, then the product price. So we have product price, and then the product price as double, and then we will have the product name as string. Okay. So what do we want to do? We want to find the selected item, and then we use the selected item to find the price, and then we use the selected item to find the name. So for instance, let's use the select case structure. So we have select case. So what will be our selector? That is the ID, the list box, the ID dot selected item, right? Okay. So now we have to do the cases. But then we have to find these guys here and use that for the cases. So so if the case is this, then what should be the price? If the case is that, then what should be the price, and so on. So let's get case this, then price, so product price is equal to, let's say, 150 Ghana cedis, right? So case, what else can we have? So if case is this, then product price is what? Let's just give it any value at all to represent the price of that product. So 180 or 190, right? So we could just copy this because the only thing that is changing is the final letter. So we could change this and just paste so that we will speed up our coding process. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have the last one being 9. So we have 1, 2, 3. Remember, we are just looking at the codes that we created up there. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yes. So for each of these, what should be the price? Maybe 290, 320, 100. We have 500. So 950. 110, 170, and 300, right? So let's say these are the prices of the various products that we have in here, right? So anytime any of these ones is selected, then the product price would be selected accordingly. All right. So the next thing we now need to do is to use that to also select the products. So if we select this, we will use that to also select this as well as the price of the product. All right, so let's go ahead and write the code that will do that. So we say list is product name dot selected index is equal to list product ID dot selected index, right? So whatever is selected at this side should be used to select the corresponding value from this side, right? Okay. So apart from that, we will now go ahead and output the data in our text boxes. So we have the txt id.text is equal to the list product ID dot selected item, right? Then the name of the product will also be the list. So that's txt name.text is equal to its product that selected item. And then we have txt price dot text is equal to product price dot to string, then currency. Okay. Okay. No. This one is product name. Okay, good. All right. So this is basically where we go with this. So this event here is going to be triggered anytime something is selected from this list box. And this here, when it's triggered, it will pick something from here based on the corresponding value and pick what is here and what is here, and then the corresponding price. So if we run this, so this is what we would have. So this is what we have here. So we would have, let's search for an item, so let's say 5. So the ID of 5. When we click on OK, it should pick this 5 and go and pick 1, 2, 3, 4. It should go and pick the wiper blades, and then the price will come as well. All right, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, that's no wiper blades. That should be engine cleaner. So it picks 5, then it picks engine cleaner, and then it picks this. All right. Now, we rather picked the selected index, even though we want to pick the selected item, right? So we need to go back and then make some changes so that we will pick the selected item instead of the selected index. So we'll come back here. So we'll come back here and change this code to selected item. Okay. So when we run it this time, we should get that result. So we'll have, let's search for 5. Then we go this way. Yes, we should have this here. So you have XXDR5 and not 5. So we are displaying the selected item, not the selected index, right? So if we go ahead and choose any of this, you will see here also changing, and you will see here also changing. So let's go to 9. You see it will change to paper clips, to change to 300 Ghana, right? If we go to 8, we go to 5, so it will keep changing as long as we continue to work on it. All right, so that is basically how the index change would work, right? Okay, so that is the kind of work we want to achieve, of course, but we use only one repetition structure. That is the do until. Now, the next thing we would do is to see how we would change it and use it for the do while as well as the for loop. To do this, let's go back to our Visual Studio. Okay, so this is our Visual Studio. We go back to the menu search, that is to this side. We double click here, so that will end up here. So this is the part that the difference would be in if we were to use the other loop. So let's create another comment here, and then put some data here. Right, so we create something to separate these two. So later we'll have to comment this out, and then we write the for loop, or we write the um, while loop. So here we would have do not until, but while, do while index less than number of items, and also is found is equal to false. Now you can look at these two conditions and see that they are actually opposite of each other, right? The while is looking for the positive side, the until is looking for the negative side. So once this condition is false, it will continue to execute until this condition is true. Here, with the while loop, once this condition is true, it will continue to execute until the condition is false. So you see that whatever we do with a while loop, you can do same with an until loop, but this time you would only use the opposite of the condition, right? So here we are looking at when index is less than number of items. Now the other side we are looking for when index is what? Greater than or equal to number of items. Opposite. Here we said found is equal to true. Here we said found is equal to false. So we are looking at the opposite sides. But then the body of it is all the same, right? The body is the same. All right, so we will just pick this here, and then we drop it here. The body is the same. So if we want, we could comment this out, right? We just comment it out very quickly, and then so how do we comment it out? Just make sure it is selected, and then you go ahead and then look for this, comment out the selected lines, right? And then you just comment them out. If we want to uncomment, you just select it again, and then you come to this side, and then you uncomment it. So let's comment this out, and then let's just run it with the new code we just created, and we expect it to run the same way, okay? So let's run it. So once we run it like this, we could search, right? So we search for trade, right? It should work exactly the same way, right? We could search for 9, right? It should come and pick this and pick that and bring us the price, right? 9, this, that. So it works the same way, right? That is how these conditions basically are. They operate the way you want them. You can use them interchangeably as long as you understand what you are doing. Okay, so let's go back and then do the same for a for loop, right? So let's do the same for a for loop. So we could write a for loop with this same item, right? So here we will use the index as the control variable. So we say for index equals 0 to number of items minus 1, Then we have step 1, right? Okay. So basically, of course, the for loop, we will need to reorganize the work just a little bit, right, to get it to work. So if is found is equal to false, then what should happen? Then you continue to do the search, right? So we will have if id equals input as list. Didn't write the if. I'm expecting IntelliSense to work, and IntelliSense does not mind me. So that is one of the ways you would know that you are not writing a correct code. When IntelliSense all of a sudden stops working, right? Then you know your code is wrong. Okay. So because I typed the wrong item, you saw what was happening. So if um, id is equal to list id dot items index, right, dot string dot swapper, then what should happen is found equals true, right? Else so if it is found equals true, what should we do? We will exit the for loop. All right. So we have if is found is false, then so as long as it is not found, what should you do? You should compare whatever is used, whatever the user enters, to whatever to all the items, right? Now, if you have found it, then you go like you exit the whole for loop. If you haven't found it, then you go and increase by 1 and do it again. If you haven't found it, you increase by 1 and do it again, right? Until a point where you find it. So once you find it, you just exit and then you proceed. So this is doing the same thing, but of course it is a bit the structure is a bit different from the um, while and the until. But then you will see the conditions are still there. It's found, it's false. Then you see the comparing the user input to the various items in the list box, and then only exiting when we find it, or exiting when we get to the end of this loop. That is, we get to the final item in the list. All right. So we could nope, sorry for that. We could comment the while out, right, and leave this one here and see if it will still behave the same way as we have been doing. All right, so this is basically our window. So it will still work the same way. Let's search. So it's working as expected. So let's search. It's working as expected. All right, so you can see everything still works. All right, so these are the three ways we can use these loops to accomplish the same thing, right? Okay, so let's get back to the last bit of this particular session. That is where we will talk about how to basically publish an application. Now you can see we have finished our application. Now how do we publish it? We publish it by going to our Visual Studio and basically working around it, right? So Visual Studio, make sure the application is selected, okay? And then you go to build, right? So from 2013, in fact, 2012, you should be able to find the published product or publish then the name of your application. Now remember the name of our application is what? Or the name of our project is Product Finder App, right? So when we come to the build, we should be able to find Publish Product Finder App. Now, when we say publish, what we mean is we can package it on a CD or package it on a pen drive or any, um, uh, let's say, any source that we can use later. We can transfer to a different computer and install it and then begin to run the application we just created, right? Or creating an executable or an installable package for use, all right? So that is what we mean by publishing. So we go to build, make sure your application is open, make sure your application is open. Then we go to build in the menu, and then we select publish that. So once we select that, it will launch that window, all right? So it will say, it will ask you to specify the location in which you want to publish, right? Of course, you might want to publish it on the online, you might want to publish it on a file server, you might want to publish it anywhere you want, right? So let's go ahead and then click on browse, right? To select where we want to publish our application, right? So we could, first of all, create. So here I want to publish my application in my C, right? And then I publish it in the my test app, right? That's where I want to publish. So you can just select anywhere or you can create a new folder. All right, that is not where I want to create this new folder. So let me go to my C file and then I create a new folder, right? So we call it product finder app. So that's the name of the folder in which I want to store my executable file. So I select it and then I go to open, right? So you see that it will come in here. Then I go next. Now, if you want to do it for a website, right? You can just select this or that. Now here we want to do it as a CD-ROM or DVD-ROM or a flash drive, whatever. So we go to next. Okay, so should your application check for update or not? That is, if you are hosting it online for keep bringing new updates and stuff like that, then you can click here and then indicate where the update should come from. Now, we will not be checking for updates, so we just leave it and move next. So now we are at the end of the setup. So all we need to do is just click on finish, and then it will be created for us. So let's click on finish, and then it will be built. So you can see the process. So the build was successful. There was no failures. Then the application was published. All right, so once it is published, it will open the application for us. So this is what was open for us, application finder. So this is it. So if I want to set it up, you can see it comes as a setup. So if I want to set it up, I just double click on this part. It will bring me a security message warning me whether I really want to install the application. Now, if I'm okay with it, I can just press proceed, and then it will go ahead and then uh, install the application for me. So this is what happens when I try to install the application. It will warn me that this application is trying to install. If I put install, it will install. If I say don't install, it will not install, and so on. So this is a typical example of how we publish an application in Visual Studio. So once we are done, we can now copy it on a pen drive, copy it on a CD, and then we can go and install it for whoever asks us to develop the application and so on. So this is where we are now. We have spoken about, we created our application, that is, and then we use the input function. We use the list box. Now we are yet, of course, the combo box, as I said, we used that last week. So whatever we are doing on the list box will apply to the combo box as well. So the next thing we will do is to talk about the image list control. All right. So let's go ahead and finish this tutorial. And then when we are done, we would go to the next tutorial where we'll discuss the image list control. And in this image list control, we are going to create a slideshow, right? Now this slideshow is actually going to be an image slideshow where you can move next, move back, move to the first image, move to the last image, or start the slideshow and wait for your images to play, or stop it and then move manually through your windows, right? So that is basically the next tutorial. So see you later in the next video. Thank you.